Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm here with Jael O'Hare for our second installment of the gender and astrology videos. Okay, so all right, Jael, what do you got for us today?
Okay. So, so last time we talked about why I'm sort of pro gender binary, and that reason being kind of, just basically like when you have no division, it's kind of the same thing as saying that everything is sort of unified into a single concept, which ends up meaning that it's nothing, it's kind of no differentiation means, and then sort of like attempts to unify the definition of gender, um sort of like and like deem it unknowable outside of self declaration or like self ID, which is commonly called, has had like several knock-on effects, but notably one of them is not the end of gender-based oppression.
Okay.
Um, so the main effect of the self ID thing is basically just that it has like created this destruction of a shared reality in language and our ability to like as a society like know and agree on what language means and what we're talking about, and yeah, and to have a shared reality at all, which I personally assert is important because it's kind of like the whole basis of how we have civilization at all is the ability to have a shared reality and have some language that describes things that we all understand what we're talking about. So, ooh, oh boy, sorry about that. Okay, self ID is a postmodern idea that divorces the individual from relationship to the collective, um, also from the body and from earthly existence, which is sort of another way to say that it's like a transhumanist perspective, or in astrology terms, it's like all sun, no moon. Um, all mean what I say, none of reflection or what's happening with you. So postmodernism itself is a nihilistic, narcissistic kind of death cult ideology, um,
Wow.
whose like only dictate is to tear things down and does not ask at what cost or what next. So again, that's kind of like why I'm not super into postmodernism myself. But I also think that the postmodernists gave us some interesting critiques that have merit, and have given us some insights. Certainly, it at least started the process of breaking us out of the previous generation, which was really doing like if X X, then you stay in the kitchen. If X Y, then you go to work. Kind of like super essentialism, which I'm also not for. So I think there's, hopefully we're gonna work on what, you know, moving into a new future where we have a more integrated perspective.
So you're fine
And
with you like the binary, but you think they should both be in the kitchen.
yeah, exactly. That's it. You got it. Everyone in the kitchen.
I think
I
if
mean, I
they're a
like to be in the
cancer,
kitchen.
they should be in the kitchen.
Hey, it's interesting. Yeah. Why not?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I guess where my critique is kind of around the idea that it's not an either or. Like we're kind of in this place right now where both sort of like radical transactivism and the right are both saying things that, in my opinion, don't hold water and are both extreme, and they're actually both an expression of postmodernism, but they're both an expression of the same sort of like energetic dynamic, and I don't think either one is sort of like the way forward or is, you know, particularly truthful. And so like I also just want to say at this point, I don't know, I just want to like acknowledge to my trans and queer and gender non-conforming siblings that like I understand that me talking about this stuff and critiquing trans and gender ideology as it stands currently is very triggering for people, and a lot of people feel like critiquing anything the movement is doing at all is like a win for the other side. And I have like I have compassion for that perspective. But I'm also kind of asking people to hang in there with me, because I want to present a framework that is more liberatory and is rooted in the assertion that we, as much as all people, can exist in the full truth and complexity of our multifaceted selves, um,
Mhm.
like without the need for invention or obfuscation of current concepts, and that true liberation and wholeness comes from the practice of knowing, accepting, and integrating all of our parts, including our responsibility to right relationship with the collective and with the earth. So again, this is a little hint here, maybe we'll talk about more later, but like um part of the thing for me that's missing from this conversation about self-identification is not debating about whether or not people know themselves, but recognizing that are not entirely, we don't create ourselves. Like my body came from my mom and dad's combined genetics and out of my mom's body, and I am like the product of the lineage of all the people in my family, and I'm also the product of every like ideological and artistic influence I've ever had and every place I've ever lived and my microbiome and like I mean our bodies are actually these like wild chimeric communities.
Well,
Chimeric
you're
meaning,
making me think of this book Ensoulment, which is about how the soul gets in the body. It was written 2,000 years ago, and they talk about what parts are from the mother, what parts are from the father, what parts are from an outside place. That the chart actually seeps into the seed while the baby is respiring in. So you're actually having a very ancient discussion, actually, which is like there are myriad of things growing a baby, plus the culture, and then Ptolemy would say it's culture and climate are growing the baby, and like so it's like I like what you're saying here is like I think it's too reductionist to say binary is it like there's just you're not a reductionist. Like I've been studying maximalism lately, and I feel like you're more of a
mm,
gender maximalist of like
mm,
let's look at all the influences on a gender and a growing creature, not just like one or two. Let's look at like millions of them, and that's
right.
what you're trying to, reminding me of.
Yeah, no, I mean, right on. And that's right. And I think, again, this is where, when we get the conflict, what we're getting is the two sides are cherry picking whatever thing they think is like the only thing, and then fighting over the phrases or the whatevers, by being like, no, it's only this, it's only the chromosomes, or it's like it's nothing, it has nothing to do with the body at all, it's just what I say in my mind. And like, whoa, okay, it's both of those things, you know.
So,
And
so
part of,
like an ID thing is saying like if I say I'm X, then I'm X. Like, and that's it.
yes,
That's the ID perspective is interesting. Well, okay, so
yeah,
I want to bring a parallel in here to this because I was just talking to a deaf friend of mine like an hour ago, and we were talking about how the trans discussion is very similar to cochlear implants because like the generation of like Pluto, Uranus, and Virgo came in and like they did all this medical technology which affected the trans community, but then also affected the deaf community where it's like you need to if you're deaf, some people say anyone who's deaf needs a cochlear implant, and some people are saying like like if in babies this anyways, it's there's these gray area issues of like when do we medicalize, when do we culturalize, when do we put a surgery on people, is it genocide to put cochlear implants in deaf babies, and like is it genocide to force trans people to have surgery? Like I'm just saying like this is actually a really thick issue, and for you to say that you're not going to speak out because it might make some people feel better, it's like, oh no, like no, in the deaf community they fight about cochlear implants like constantly because it's like it's the medicalization of a culture basically, and that's
yeah,
actually could be considered genocide. And so anyway, but it makes me
mm,
think of a deaf person saying from an ID perspective, if they say they're deaf, then they're deaf. Can you imagine that? Like that is, what do you think of that? Like, I know we're not talking about deafness, but I'm just saying like the ID thing is
mm,
a little it's a little rogue, like to just say like if I identify as like if like being like me saying like, Well, I'm trans, Jael, because I wanted, because I just said so. Like,
Right,
but like here I am
right.
living as a female with culture receiving me as female, like all these, it's just that's political. That's political.
Absolutely. And I love this parallel actually. I think again the missing part, which we don't know or talk about that much in our culture because our culture is very narcissistic, is the other part. So you and how you feel about yourself is valid, um, but we are social beings, and part of who we are in the world is who we are to other people. So, like, there are trans people who transition and live their lives as a certain gender, and 99% of the people in their lives feel great about that, feel fine about it. They know or don't know, it doesn't matter, but they're like living that life. They're in that container, and so they're accepted as that gender. And this has been true for a long time. I mean, honestly, you referenced Mishfest before. Um, One of the things about Mishfest was actually, I mean, regardless of what you think about this policy, basically, if you could go to the festival and pass and weren't being seen as male, it was okay for you to be there. They weren't like doing checks, you know? Um, so again, regardless of what you politically think about that as a thing, the reason I'm pointing that out is because part of the way the discourse has gone has been to say, like, we can't possibly know what anything is. There's just literally no way to know anything. But that's not true. Like, even though it's true on the large scale that gender as a construct and the definition of gender as a construct is very different from place to place, from time to time. It changes. And if you take the aggregate of everything that has ever been considered gender outside of like physicality, like social stuff, it spans the whole, it is unknowable. It's like a total soup. But we don't live in all time and space. We live in specific communities in specific times and have specific relationships. And the people that we are and live around do have ideas about what that construct is and have an intuitive sense of who is embodying that construct or not,
So that
which,
makes me want to
yeah,
say, like, I love how you're saying postmodernism just takes it all away and that you're like, oh no, because actually the question you're asking there is gender intrinsic or extrinsic or both, right? And it's like,
right.
if it's intrinsic, it only exists within, right? And if it's extrinsic, it exists without. And I think you're saying it's a both, right? It's like both intrinsic, but it's also extrinsic.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And honestly, that is a theme you will hear throughout pretty much everything I say, regardless of topic, which is both and consciousness, you know?
Whoa.
Like, my thought is not about determining and legislating what is right or wrong, which is it? Is it yes or no? Is it black or white? But it's like really looking at a situation in its full complexity and nuance and seeing the parts as well as the sort of like reductionist summation. Because that's what we do. When we look at somebody and we think that they are a man or a woman, what we're seeing and sort of subconsciously determining is a sort of a calculation of all the different things that we're seeing and whether or not each slider, like we were talking about last time, goes this way or that way. And we all have the capacity to identify somebody in a gender, even if they have discernibly gender nonconforming traits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and this
So,
is where a lot of gender is making other people comfortable or uncomfortable, which is saying like some trans people transition to make other people more comfortable because people keep reading them extrinsically as a certain gender, and they're like, okay, I'll have surgery to live out that gender so that we don't have to be confused anymore. And this is why I'm coming in from the astrology layer and saying, no, gender is cyclical and fluctuate, right? It's like you might be holding down a gender in a certain transit, and that's making people read you as a certain gender. But when you get another transit, your energy is going to vibe different, and you're going to actually now be trying to hold down that gender. I've seen people who've had surgeries to make people feel comfortable, and then the other part of their chart comes out and they're vibing the other gender. And it's like it actually doesn't solve that. In that case, the surgery didn't solve that extrinsic discomfort thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say for myself, I was somebody who was very confusing to people for most of my life before I medically transitioned. And now I'm not confusing to people at all. You know, people, if when I say that I'm trans, usually say things like, "Oh, I had no idea," which I mean, that's not the compliment you think it is, but yeah, um, it's complicated. But yeah, so for me, it eventually ended up being a decision of kind of being both. Like I recognized a dissonance that with myself and with other people, and I felt like transitioning would lessen a load that I was carrying. Um, and it did. And I feel great about it. You
Nice.
know, so hey, that's great. But um there's something about the sort of there's something complicated there too, because there was a part of me that also was like proud of and appreciated the fact that I disrupted that rigid idea of what a person who has the like female check box slider on the reproductive aspect list. Um, Popo. Uh, you know, so like, sorry, that like immediately made me lose my train of thought.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I have
No,
something to
sorry.
say though.
What's that?
I have something to say when
Oh, yeah.
if you did
I
general.
mean, yeah, I lost it. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. Well, this is really interesting. You are teaching me so much, is why I'm going to call you the professor, and you'll probably get mad about that too, because I put some identity on you. But you're like a professor, because listen to me. Okay, I make the case that I intrinsically have three genders. Okay, like I'm a three spirit, because my seventh degree in astrology is very female, my 14th degree is very feminine, and then my 28th degree is extremely masculine. It's a sun square Mars, sun conjunct Mercury and Scorpio, whatever. I'm just like rah, rah, rah. Right. But the reason that it's not really okay for me to say that I'm trans or three spirit is because extrinsically people don't have any tension over my gender. They actually see me as female, and that's fine. And like, so I don't need to like figure out this for people. But intrinsically, I definitely am a dude at the 28th degree, but that just renders to people as tough chick, or like, or weird, like, oh, what, where this doll girl is like acting all tough. Like, what's going on? Like, they don't, but that doesn't make them uncomfortable from a gender perspective. And that's why it would be wrong for me to say I'm trans because I have a 28th degree that's kind of dudely, because it's not causing that confusion. You know what I'm saying? So that's interesting, because you kind of just answered a question for me of like, why is that controversial for me to say I'm a three spirit, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would say that that's like, I don't think that that necessarily also means that you can't be trans. Um, that is almost a whole other sort of bag of worms in a lot of ways, because like, so I don't want to go too far in this direction, but like basically, you know, on a medical, scientific, measurable level, sex and gender are actually measurable things when we're talking about individual characteristics. And it is already shown, even though there's not even anywhere near enough research, but there could be more, that, you know, like, for example, when you're in the womb, you don't just have one gender determining rush of hormones during your gestation period. There's one at the beginning, there's one in the second trimester, there's one, you know, like there's multiple rushes. And for example, people who have had like an abnormal prenatal testosterone, um, first of all, that's a measurable thing. One of the ways that they diagnose it is like people, when you have, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, when you have like your ring finger is longer than your forefinger, that's one of the signs of it. And that's like one of the diagnostic criteria, which I have obviously. but that marker is associated with queerness, um, autism, and gender nonconformity and some other stuff. But it doesn't say whether or not you're gay or trans, because being trans is a thing you do. I mean, again, I understand people are saying trans is gender nonconforming, but I'm not talking about trans in that way. I'm talking about trans as in you have transitioned, and also specifically that like your, say, mental gender is different than your reproductive organ gender. So there's like scientific data that that's a measurable thing, that a person can have like for example, male people use more of their gray matter, like have more like gray matter and do more like focus specific tasks, whereas like female sex brains have more interpersonal and multitasking and white matter involvement, things like that. So, I mean, I think if they studied it more, they would find that there are a lot of cis-identified people who have quote unquote mismatched brains. So I don't know if that necessarily makes you trans either. This is why I'm more comfortable with saying that people are trans if they transition, and saying that when people are gender nonconforming, they're just gender nonconforming. Because anybody can be gender nonconforming and you can identify with that or not, but like it is a sort of like observable state, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that there's so much language coming from you about like your chart makes a lot of language, and that's a beautiful thing about you because it's not just the experience we have in life, it's a narrative we form over that experience. And like the narrative you're forming over your life with gender is just so rich and so beautiful. And like the students at this school are just going to benefit so much from this. But what I hear you is you have all this language about gender, and you're like a language maximalist. Is like as far as like one of the things my problem with the Portland School of Astrology was the students kept trying to get me to take out words. And I'm like, no, that's a
Right.
minimalism approach to this equation. Like I'm going into like, let's talk more about more things. Like we need more conversation, not like taking out, so it's like, I like that you're saying trans could be used in this way and gender non-conforming. We don't take out the word because we don't like it. We add in another word and we use more language, right? So the astrology is going to come into the equation, and you and I are going to have many conversations. I can see we're going to have episode after episode because it's like we're going to add in more language, and then we're going to add into the astrology. Now what? Now what? Now what? It's just more. Like, why is a better conversation less? I think a better conversation is probably more. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And I mean, I feel like this might be surprising to people who are not astrologers when I say this, but astrology is kind of the perfect framework to talk about this topic, because it's super complicated and it's very loaded for people. But I am scared at what I see in not only the infighting within our community and the way that people are othering each other, even within the trans community, which is already a very small community. But also that like this sort of dedication to this like adherence to the like postmodern gender ideology, or you're not one of us kind of thing. Again, with people in the community and certainly with people who aren't, in my opinion, like I don't know, it's making us toothless to fight against the tide of like actual transphobia and homophobia that is real, although I would say arguably from a minority, because when we sort of conceptualize ourselves as being illegitimate as trans people outside of this sort of like ideological house of mirrors, or sort of the total reinvention of gender and sex itself, um the like the people that actually hate us are, I don't know, yeah, it's just not that many people. But when we decide that we need to marry postmodern gender ideology with the idea of transphobia, and that anybody who critiques the ideology is a bigot and is transphobia, we now are like conditioning all ourselves as a community to see millions of bigots where there are just people who are concerned about postmodern ideology, although most people don't have the words for that. So they're just like, something feels fucked up here, you
Well,
know?
one of the problems I see in astrology, I get yelled at by Barry Perlman all the time. Every time gender or queerness comes up in astrology, and he's like, looking for gender in the chart is like looking for genetic, predisposition towards gender or queerness or whatever. But what I think he's fighting against is cis male astrologers looking in the chart for gender or queerness, and they're like, it's Uranus. It's just, they distill it down to one planet, and they say like, oh, it's just this one planet that makes people gay or not gay. What I
Right.
want is for more of the trans community to come out talking about gender and astrology and actually showing the cis males how it could be done. No, it's
Right.
not one planet. We're looking at a cyclical, fluctuating gender with many different parts, many aspects of personality. A person can have several aspects of gender in one chart. Like, so I think what's the problem isn't that there's bigots out there in astrology, it's that there's a reductionist viewpoint of queerness into one planet. Now that is messed up.
Full agree. Full agree. And that could be part of it, or it could not be part of it. And then, of course, as a side note, with the type of astrologer you're talking about, the focus and the model is constructed entirely on gay men and ignores all other presentations and all other ways of coming at being queer, gender nonconforming. Because in my experience, different planets are involved, different aspects are involved, and yeah, Uranus can be a part of it. Certainly isn't my chart,
Yeah.
but it's not the only thing.
Right. Oh yeah. Well, yeah, all 10 planets are involved with a person's identity. Now I think that
Exactly.
astrology is also a perfect playground for us to talk about gender because it's identity politics. Like, I actually majored in identity politics, and people are like, what are
Mm,
you gonna do with that? Who knew I'd be an astrologer? But like, it's one of the most identity political things to say, like, you are this, you are this, you are this. Now, what do you think? Like, see how it's an identity politics dance, and it's actually very political to even read a chart, to even say, I know who you are is political. Like, so
yes, yes. Yeah, I totally agree, which is also why I feel like, as a note to astrologers who want to counsel folks in this way, it's good to, this is why, again, this kind of goes back to the like pro-binary thing. It's good to keep it simple to the archetypes, and because there's a sort of like, especially when you're reading for somebody else, like presenting them with sort of these like abstract strokes that are archetypical flavors can help them resonate with something or bring something up inside of them that makes sense to them, and then they can name that thing directly for themselves. So instead of like going all the way by saying like, oh, I know that, Mercury here with means this, and then just being like, you're gay. You could say a way more specific thing, like you could say like, it's, you might want to work with flowers and you have a soft way of speaking and you're, or I don't know, whatever the things are or whatever that like might paint a more feminine or masculine picture, or like, um, and there are ways to, when you look at the, so it's like, it's really about like, in order to look at sex and gender in a chart, it's, that's, those things are concepts that are an amalgamation of a whole list of things. So you need to know what those characteristics are. And I would say where the binary thing comes in is that when you get really granular about characteristics, each characteristic will be in a binary 1 0 1 0 1 0, right? Like there's no three in coding. Like,
Interesting. Well, like if you're a Virgo, you're like clean or not, clean or not. Like is that what you're kind of saying? Like, or like a
I
Cancer,
mean, it would
your
be
homebody
way
or
more
not.
specific than that, but yes, essentially. Sort of, shit, I'm like losing my examples. It, so like if each binary is like a line and you are a point on that line, and again that's like through time too, so we can only, that's a whole other thing, but like that's just one point, and as you add each characteristic in its place on the 1-0, then you get dimension. So like that's the both and thinking, right? Like it's not yes or no binary. It's let's correct the misunderstanding of how the binary is being used, which is like the radical right being like the binary is just chromosomes, which was like even that doesn't fall easy, you know. So, but like there's all these things, right? So it's like, I mean, I'd be curious almost at like looking at people's charts in the first, second, and third trimesters. Like what was happening during that when we're talking about the formation of the body, or like in human design, they have the design chart, which is 88 days. That would be second trimester, 88 days before you're born. That's interesting. You know, there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but my point is the system of astrology, but also just language in general, does not work and cannot be relational and cannot be used in any way to communicate, cooperate, or do any of the things that we need to do as a human species unless the granular pieces have rigid, unmoving definitions. But none of us are a granular individual dot. We're a billion dots, you
So you're
know?
saying like we need like if we're reading a chart, we're like, you're a Cancer sun, and so some people would say you like to cook, and it's like now we get the slider, yes, no, like, do you agree? And if they're like, well, kind of, I kind of like to cook, you're like, the binary shouldn't be used as yes, no only. It's yes, kind of is fine, and like, but you, so it's like you from an identity politics perspective, our job is to kind of like present a delineation, let them slider it, and be like, yeah, I agree with that this much, and then we realize, oh, it's testable. You can actually watch a transit to it and test it in real time to decide where your slider is, basically.
Yes. Yes, basically. I mean, again, because of who and how I am, something like sun in a sign is like still to me incredibly broad. I mean, I'd be almost more like I like to more look at points more granularly, anyways, just in general. Like I'm like, what fixed star is there? What do we have for a Sabian symbol? What do we have for an I Ching hexagram? What do we have for this for that? I mean, because again, I
Okay.
guess you're right. I am a maximalist. I have this big spreadsheet that has every system that I've come across, and I'm always adding to it that has like each degree and everything that lines up on that degree. And I find for me, like I'm finding the most essential universal truths by integrating what is common among the maximum amount of things.
Well, and you have to remember that astrology is cyclical and fluctuating, so you can be all of those things in your chart. Depends on the time. What time is it for Jael, right? You can take the moon around the chart. This is why astrology is so much more vast and complex than any binary, because we're like, who are you today? Who are you tomorrow? Who are you the day after that? And we can test it against your, you know, it's like what you do is you have your maximal list for each point, and then when the moon's on that point, you pull out that list for that moment, and then you check out your sliders for that moment. Like, but
Right.
the quantification of a chart and to say like we're going to count up the points and decide if it's masculine or feminine. It's like, no, is it masculine or feminine today? And if
Right.
so,
And
where's
how?
okay,
And like what flavor?
let's talk about that. That's actually interesting. How is Virgo a different gender of feminine than Cancer, right? Because like isn't Virgo
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be a feminine sign, but like it's it's like earthy
Right.
feminine. It's
Yeah.
so
I
different. It
mean,
doesn't even feel
right.
feminine.
It's yeah, totally. I mean, I think Virgo is a sort of like it's masculine in that it is self-possessed, but it's feminine in that it is contemplative. It integrates, it, you know, it's but or you could say also it separates. It's, you know, separating the wheat from the chaff. That's classic Virgo thing. So like, and that's Martian, you know, separating, cutting is Martian. So like, and what planet rules Virgo? Mercury, a bi-gender sign, right? So that's very appropriate for Virgo to be not really neutral as much as a balanced masculine and feminine. Like some of the planets with like the like the more outer planets are so far away from personal experience that it's kind of like silly to try to put a gender on them, really, because they're like, yeah, they're too far away from that like human thing. So like Virgo is very both instead of like, because right, because that, like, when we're talking about being non-binary, being gender non-conforming, there are ways that somebody can be like really loud masculine and feminine at the same time, or have like a very hard to like it's Pat or something. That's for us
Yeah,
old people.
Pat. Oh my, that's so
um
amazing. No, I think you're right on there that Virgo is mercurial, and Mercury is a non-gendered force in some ways. It's like the mental quality is both genders and all genders and every gender that ever existed. Like the thoughts have no gender. I mean, like in some way, I mean, I guess thoughts could be considered to have gender. Like I'm thinking about my dolls. Okay, people would ascribe that a feminine thought. I'm thinking about my motorcycle. They would ascribe that a masculine thought, right? But the thoughts themselves have no gender. So I just learned something. Oh yeah, it's like duh. Virgo is mercurial. It's like it's more mental than it is, But then there are some signs that are kind of gendered, like Pisces. Like doesn't that feel
mhm.
like feminine?
Um, it does, although I feel like some, for me at least, a lot of times when I think about Piscean energy, I often think of men, but like, I don't know, it's very like, so Pisces, Pisces is a Jupiter ruled sign, and to me, that is on the sort of like we talked about last time, the third tier in terms of strength of gender, kind of being in the ambiguous zone, but being kind of masculine, right? Because especially if you think about Sagittarius, but when you think about more like the archetype of like Zeus as Jupiter and that kind of stuff. Um, and its expansive quality gives it this sort of a masculine quality. But Pisces' version of that is feminine because it's sort of like it has dissolved into everythingness, which is also why it's associated with Neptune, of course. And when you have everythingness, you have lack of differentiation. And another word for differentiation is individuality. And one could say that individuality is a masculine quality and that inclusion is a feminine quality.
Interesting. Just from a vibe perspective, because I have a Pisces moon square Neptune and I can feel auras, and it's like standing next to Pisces aurically feels squishy aurically. It's like kind of like even I like one of my really good friends is a trans guy and he's super Pisces, but he's a super dude. Like he's passes and everything like that, but like super Pisces energy, and I get like a divinity preacher energy. It's like it's kind of like plasma in the aura. So why do we call that
Right.
feminine? I don't know. It's like there are men with plasma in
Yeah.
the aura too. They're like preachers and
Yeah.
like yogis, and like it's almost like all genders and all it would be like saying like God has a gender. It's like God is a they them duh. It's like,
Right.
it's like all
Right.
genders. Maybe Pisces is
Yeah.
inclusive of all energy and all auras and everything that exists in an aura. Like I don't know, but it does
Right.
have a soft quality to it, like a snuggly vibe, which to me feel like we would ascribe as feminine, like snuggling is feminine. But a lot of guys like to snuggle, so
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, I guess it makes me think about like Kurt Cobain,
Oh yeah,
like addiction for one, which is a big thing. And Pisces can really struggle with reality too.
yeah.
Like both like addiction because of the like intense pain and need to escape the body and escape the corporeal form, and sort of like I gotta get out, like it's so intense, and I'm like um yeah, I don't know, sorry, I lost my train of thought again, but
Well, okay,
yeah, I
let's
don't know,
talk about, okay, can we talk about the limits of, okay, peaking on gender? So like, okay, here's a thing I've
mhm,
noticed with a lot of trans charts, like female to male trans people. they have a super high peaking Mars, meaning that the Mars is
Mm,
super masculine. So it's like
right.
there's something about it like it'll be like Mars in Leo opposed the moon. I've known a few of those.
Yeah.
It'll be like Mars. I don't know if I can include you, but like
Yeah. Mars, Uranus, square the ascendant.
in Sagittarius, Mars in Sagittarius. So it's
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
hot Mars high up in
Yeah.
the chart, conjunct Uranus. So it's like it's a high peaking Mars. And so what we get is the person, another one is Mars in Scorpio with an Aries rising, the Mars trine the sun. So it's like we get like a really strong Mars. And what that means is in the cycle of 1 month with the moon going around, this person will peak at super masculine behaviors to the point where people are
Mm,
like, are you not female? You know, it's like that's where the confusion comes in when there's the XX chromosome of like, wait, I thought you were female, but like you're such a dude. Like, what is going on? Like, so there is in most trans male charts that I've met a Mars that is just off the chain. And so we do, that's where we get that peaking ability of like being hyper masculine to the point where people get confused, basically. So what do you think of that?
yeah. No, I mean, I think that's totally right on. Although I will say that that signature is probably something that is more associated with like binary trans men and less associated with AFAB people who identify as trans in some of the sort of new configurations that don't really have anything to do with being masculine, um, which, regardless of what one thinks of, is a thing that happens. So I just
So
wanted
you're,
to.
so you're saying, just to translate for the viewer, so like you're saying there are trans people who don't really like aren't passing, they're more of complex gender queer varieties of trans people that aren't like because the men I'm talking
Well,
about,
some of them are passing, but
okay.
they might like put glitter in their beard and wear makeup and like wear really feminine clothes and be like, I'm a gender fuck and like you can't know who I
Okay,
am and stuff like that.
well,
So
in some of these high peaking Mars charts, we actually do have feminine traits in there. Like, so another one I have is a Sun Mars conjunction in Sagittarius with a Pisces moon. This one is the most fierce drummer I've ever met in my life, female assigned at birth, but like just a beast on the drums. Like, and they're 46 and they've been doing this their whole life. And then the Pisces moon is like, can you come here? Like super whiny. Like, so we get like
right.
a double gender where
God, I love that.
the peak of masculinity is higher than I've seen in most males, and there
Mm,
is a feminine in person in there. It's a both. Like,
right,
so
right, right. Which is why it's so beautiful and why I think we're so like limited by trying to fight this battle about like yes or no and blah blah blah. Like that's just like not the right conversation to be having, I feel like, and
well,
it's just
and so I feel like with the glitter bearing people, like you're saying, it's like there's a glitter bearer in the chart, and there's a dude in the chart, and a female in the chart, and it's like this is why I'm a radical activist around astro. It's like without astrology in the gender equation, y'all are missing something. Like no
yeah,
offense, but you all can't see something I can see. Like I see
right.
it, and I see it going flux. Like I feel their auras fluctuating. It's like, come on, bro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, so like this kind of goes back to that sort of like idea of like the collective, and I want to bring that into with the astrology as sort of like thinking about the collective as like moon qualities or like and that rejection of that kind of thing, because when we're saying that gender is something that is only an idea, which is a very, by the way, archetypically masculine and sort of sun-based idea, only sort of like what I say or what I present and what's coming from me, um, is like it's denying the body. And again, as a trans person who has suffered greatly with gender dysphoria, it is painful to acknowledge certain things about physicality, but that's also something for me that through like a ton of self work and also I think transition helped with that. I'm able to accept parts of my body and the way that my body is and how I was born and all of myself by doing this spiritual work of like trying to be curious about who am I and really trying to know that in a like really specific, honest way that like incorporates everything but is also not reductionist. And I just like, I don't know, there's a lot of arguments being made about kind of like, you know, the people who get the most gender conforming surgery in adolescence or as kids are cis people. For like when young men or young male people have gynecomastia, they get top surgery, and like it's becoming a lot more popular for teenagers to get cosmetic surgery of various kinds and like gene editing and like all this kind of stuff. And I agree when activists say like, what's the difference between gender affirming surgery for a cis kid and a trans kid? But I worry about where culture is headed in a general way, which is sort of like trying to basically have everybody want to upload their consciousness to the internet and have your only existence or identity be like this sort of conceptual thing. And I think the conceptual thing matters and that it's real, but I also think that our physicality matters. And I think that physical reality matters. And I also think that you are everything that you ever have been in the past, that you are now, and that you will be in the future, which again is a thing that astrology shows us, right?
Yeah,
So
like you're challenging the idea that one day we arrive at a gender. Like, what if you never arrive? We never arrive. Like this idea
right.
that we're going to arrive at the correct gender and then live the rest of our life that way is it just we're actually blowing that out of the water. Like,
Exactly. So I think it's, and that's again, this isn't just gender. This is everything about everyone. You know, like we are like these again, these like chimeric beings, which are like different, all different kinds of like we're a community. A human body is a community, and the more that you really think about it and even study it on a scientific level, where do I end exactly? Like when I slough off cells when I'm walking down the street, like is it me anymore? Like, I mean, I don't know, we could go real deep in that direction with that whole thing, but this brings me back to why it matters what the relationship is between who you are and who you are for other people and who you are in the community. And I think that a lot of people are rightly upset about trans folks who want to insist that simply declaring something means that it changes the reality for the other person. So, like, they're like in a more kind of traditional view of transness, people transitioned so that they were aligned with themselves, but also because they wanted to live lives in a gender role in society that would have been mismatched in the physicality that typically was like focused entirely on their genitalia. So like, I mean, that's a whole other thing. Why aren't we considering people intersex if we can like determine that their brain has a sex that's different than their genitalia? Like, how is that not a part of sex if it's physical? You know, different topic, but so I think that there's like, even though it's again it's very painful for us, like, or for I should say for people who experience dysphoria, because again I also have to acknowledge there is a very large group of young trans people under this ideology who don't think dysphoria is necessary for trans, and they don't think that transitioning or changing your presentation is necessary to be called trans either. So I just have to acknowledge that, although it makes it confusing. But I would say that on some level, people kind of are being dishonest when they kind of fail to recognize the entirety of who they are. And I think that the activism should be around pushing that for the idea that we should accept people in their complexity with their past as this, or with their genitalia as this, or used to be this, or whatever, body used to be this, mind this, whatever. We should be pushing to accept people and understand people as these extremely complex beings who are valid in and of themselves, as opposed to trying to rewrite what has been considered before. If does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I just want to address the dysphoria thing because astrology knows more about dysphoria than anything else. Why? Because you can have a surgery, right? And then you think you fixed your gender problem and you still have dysphoria. What is that? It's transits to natal aspects. Transits bring in dysphorias. Okay, this happens over and over. People get plastic surgery, have more dysphoria, want more plastic surgery, more dysphoria. It's transits to
Right.
natal aspects of personality. Leslie Feinberg is a really good example of this. Sun Saturn
Mm,
conjunction in Virgo. You do the math there. Like constantly not liking the physical form, like transits to that. Now I don't like the physical form. I already had a surgery. I want another surgery. I want another surgery. But it's like if we expect Leslie Feinberg to arrive one day, then we're looking at Leslie Feinberg in a wrong way. Leslie Feinberg is
mhm.
a cyclical person who will cyclically want to redo the body and identity. That is not dysphoria. That is a cyclical expression of a human life. Okay, so
Right.
I think astrology knows more about dysphorias. It's like if we can look in the natal aspects that have these moods, right? We can say like, oh, your sun Saturn. This is where astrological remediation comes in. Your sun Saturn gets in the mood to critique yourself. Okay, over and over and over again. You know, fixing it with one surgery is not the answer. The answer is to
Right.
teach them the aspect of personality, figure out what we're going to do on transits to that. Maybe surgery isn't the only answer. Maybe you can wear a
Right.
different outfit. Maybe you can do this. Maybe that it's going to
Mhm.
take thousands of things to handle this thing because it's going to be transit after transit after transit after transit. See what I mean? So, like,
Oh
thank
yeah.
you for having these conversations with me because you are actually at my level with this, and you're actually helping me to express the things that have been bothering me for years of just like these dysphorias are not going to be solved by surgery. They're going to be just
Right.
solved by astrological remediation. And that's where, it's like I have to infiltrate. I gotta like crawl up and infiltrate transits and like everything that ever existed because like I'm a radical.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
an
I mean, and
activist.
also it's not that surgery isn't the right thing for people too. You know,
Yeah.
like my personal experience with surgery is that I like really sort of was holding on to some really hard experiences and feelings about gender and other things for, God, I don't know, like 30 years or something. And I felt like I had done all of this work and sort of gotten to a point where I felt like everything else I had basically reckoned with. And I felt pretty much okay with myself. But I had back problems and breathing problems and physical discomfort over the fact that I was binding my chest. And I tried really hard to not bind too tight, and I tried to be safe about it, and I tried to whatever. But no matter what I could do in any configuration with everything I tried mentally, physically, and otherwise, I was in a severe amount of physical discomfort and distress over that experience. And it's so weird. After I had surgery, like literally almost immediately, I kept like forgetting I had surgery because it just seems normal. Like
Interesting.
it really just, I like sometimes I forget that that was ever a thing because it just seems like the normal thing that was happening before, even though I realize that that's not true.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I've been known to sort of experience time in a nonlinear way, but you know,
You
that's a
are
different
definitely
story.
special. We're gonna have to put a time out because our time is up. But
Oh my gosh.
well, first of all, I want people to like and subscribe. And the reason for that is that we're going to have more and more gender conversations on this page, on this YouTube channel. And so, like, subscribe if you want to be updated on all the gender conversations. And I want people to make gender rebuttal videos, gender and astrology videos. We want as many people in this conversation as we can. Now, Jael, do we have more things to talk about? Should we meet again?
Absolutely. And really like I mean, we still somehow have only scratched the surface. Like I really have a framework and a lot of ideas that I've been working on for a long time that like again, even though they might seem a little triggering on the surface for trans folks, like what I am ultimately kind of going for here is like, I don't know, like I really believe that we can heal ourselves and the collective and all of this crap that's going on, you know, culture wars wise, by demonstrating radical self-love for ourselves, and therefore being able to be resilient and secure enough in who we are so that we can hold space for difference and for dissent and model like the complexity of like human beingness and sort of like inspire others to expand into their own like fullness and potentialities, and sort of like stepping off of this like polarity seesaw and kind of like coming back into the middle and like finding a balance in there. Like I really believe that like I want for trans people to be able to like hold themselves in their entirety and hold the paradox and like be loved and accepted by themselves and by society. And I think that like by rethinking some of these things and like getting honest in some places and getting integrated in some places, like we could really do a lot of healing for everybody, including ourselves.
Beautiful. Well, you're a wonderful activist, and I am just enjoying this so much. So when we get off of here, I'm going to email you to set up our next time. All right.
Great.
Thank you,
All
Jael,
right. Bye, babes. Mwah.
everyone.